Today's daf is daf ches. We'll start 4 lines down from the top of the Amud. Now we had Rabbi Shimon's shita, Ula Rabbi Shimon the Yomar Tamid Meratza, that the tzitz is always Meratza, even if it's not worn on the Metzach of the Kohen Gadol. Vaksiv, the question is now, how does he interpret the pasuk al Metach? It's got to be al Metach Aaron, and then Vinas Avon. And then it can be the bearer, so to speak, of all the avonos. How does Reb Shimon interpret this pasuk, which clearly indicates that it's got to be al metzcho? And the Gemara answers, "Ahula mikva l'kvalo makom hudios." So the pasuk is not telling you that in all circumstances the tzitz, in order to be effective, must be al metzcho, but rather it's telling you that when the Kohen Gadol is makayim the mitzvah of wearing the tzitz, he should know where to put it. He has to place it al metzcho. And Rashi says that it's literally on the forehead, meaning it's below the hairline. And the Ritva disagrees. He holds that it has to be keneged bein einecha, like the tefillin shel rosh, above the hairline. Gemara asks, Rabbi Yehuda l'kvolo mokom minoli, since Rabbi Yehuda uses the pasuk al mitzcho to derive the conclusion that the tzitz is only meratza when the Kohen Gadol is wearing it, how does he derive the conclusion from that very same pasuk al mitzcho exactly where the tzitz has to be located? And the Gemara is going to try to establish that he can learn two things from the same pasuk. Why? Nafkale me al mitzcho. In other words, there's an extra vav at the end of the word mitzcho. It could have said metach. And the word mitzcho is going to add with the vav an additional halacha that not only as far as the critical requirement that it be al mitzcho in order to be maratza, but it also teaches me the exact location al mitzcho. Rab Shimon nami typically may al mitzcho. Why shouldn't Rabbi Shimon use the extra vav of al mitzcho to derive the conclusion that that's the location where the tzitz is to be placed on the body of the Kohen Gadol? And then once he has that derivation of makom, likva makom, from the vav, he derives from the vav, then the mitzcho, the metzach itself, is to teach us, as Rabbi Yehuda argues, that you must have it al mitzcho. Gemara says, Einoch hinam. The Gemara at this point, in order to protect the shita of Rav Shimon, has to revamp its understanding of Rav Shimon. Ella, al metzcho b'nosamai ovidle, but rather, what does Rabbi Shimon do with the metzach mitzcho? Amalecha, roi lemetzach meratza, she'eno roi lemetzach eno meratza. The Torah is not only teaching me the location of the tzitz on the forehead of the Kohen Gadol, but also that the tzitz has to be complete, it has to be whole, it has to be suitable for being worn al mitzcha. Lafuki, this is to disqualify the case of nishbar tzitz. If the tzitz gets broken, the lo meratz, it doesn't have the power to be meratz. So we need a cheft of a tzitz. It doesn't have to be al mitzcho. As far as the kiyum mitzvah of levisha, where would the Kohen Gadol place it? That's going to be derived from metzach, and it's going to be on the forehead. That's where he has to locate it. What we don't require is that he wear the tzitz. There's a ritzui tzitz from the cheft to the tzitz, but it's got to be a cheft that's roy for levisha, as opposed to nishbar is not roy levisha. And this is very common that we find in Shas, that there's X that's not likuva, but even if X is not likuva, the cheft itself has to be roy leX. So, for example, you don't need to taste the tam of matzah, but you need a matzah that's roy letam. And there are many such examples. Basically, the principle of kol roy lebila ein bila makeves. Rabbi Yehuda nishbar tzitz minole. Now, this Gemara that's asking what is the source, according to Rabbi Yehuda, since he uses both metzach and mitcho, for the halacha that if it's nishbar, it's not marat. Very difficult question. course, if it's nishbar, it's not maratza. Even if it's whole, if he's not wearing it, and nishbar he can't wear, it's not maratza. So what does the Gemara mean by asking nishbar tzitz minole? Apparently, the Gemara's logic is that there must have been a source for nishbar tzitz, and then Rabbi Yehuda is free to derive from al mitzcho that he must be wearing the tzitz, because you cannot use, as Rabbi Shimon insists, the pasuk al mitzcho to derive and exclude the case of nishbar. So now that Rabbi Yehuda has some sort of independent source from which he could derive the conclusion that nishbar tzitz is Eina Maratza, and now he can go a step further, and he can use this pasuk, which is now free, to derive the conclusion that the Kohen Gadol has to be wearing the tzitz in order for the tzitz to be Maratza. The Kohen's Levisha activates the power of Ritu tzitz. And the Gemara answers, Nafkale mi metzach mitzcha. That instead of saying metzach, it says mitzcho. So Rabbi Yehuda says that the extra vav is going to teach me that if it's broken, it's not roy lulavisha, and it's not maratza. And then metzach itself, without the vav, is teaching me that he's got to be wearing it. Rabbi Shimon, metzach mitzcho lo mashmal. Rabbi Shimon did not add an extra drasha from the vav. The Gemara now goes back to its analysis of the issue of whether or not Tuma is Hutra b'tzibur or Dechuya b'tzibur, which we said was Machlokus of Nachman or Rav Sheshes. Nema Hani Tanoi b'Hani Tanoi. Perhaps we could say that we have another Machlokus Tanoim, and that is going to reveal a light on this Machlokus Tanoim. And we're talking about, again, a carbon tzibur, and we want to know whether hutra b'tzibur or lo hutra b'tzibur, and it's only dechuya b'tzibur, and that Rabbi Shimon said was a machlokes tanoim. Now we have the Sanya of Bryce. Echad zeh, the echad zeh, whether it's the preacher of the Kohen Gadol before Yom Kippur or the preacher of the Kohen Asor Sapora, Mazin Olav Kol Shiva. We take the Mechatos and we do Azah all 7 days. And we call Chatos Shayusham. During the course of time, there was this paraduma, that paraduma. We'll take everything that we need, gather together, Mechatos sufficient. And this is Rabbi Meir's Shita, that on a daily basis during these 7 days, both for the Kohen Gadol and for the Kohen Asor Sapora, we require Hazah. Rabbi Yossi Omer, ein mazen olav ela shlishi ushvi bilvad. I mean, after all, we are concerned about the possibility of tumas mes. And as far as the requirement of tara from tumas mes, all we need is hazah on shlishi and shvi, 2 days out of the week. Why then, asks Rabbi Yossi as an implicit question, objecting to Rabbi Meir, would we require hazah on a daily basis every single day of the week? Now, let's just take a moment of time as an introduction to the next sugya to begin to understand the logic of Rabbi Meir, the requirement of hazah on a daily basis. You're right, Rabbi Yossi, all you need is shlishi or shvi, but any day of the week could potentially be shvi or shvi. We don't know exactly when he contaminated himself with tumas mes. And it's very possible that the first day of the 7 days is actually the third day. And it's possible that the second day of the 7 days is his third day, and so forth and so on. Let's say we get to the 5th day. It's very possible that the 5th day is the 7th day since he contracted tumah. And it's possible that the 7th day is the 7th day. So we need to cover all our bases, says Rabbi Meir. Therefore, we're going to require hazah on a daily basis. Now the Brisa quotes a third sheet of the Tanakh. Rav Chanina Skan Kohanim Omer, Kohen Asor Sapor Mazin Olav Kol Shiva. He makes a compromise shita. As far as the Kohen Asoref is concerned, we're going to up the ante and require a daily sprinkling of the Mechatos for the entire period of 7 days. But as far as Kohen Gadol, preparing him to the preacher for Yom Kippurim, ein mazan olav ela b'shlishi ushvi. He accepts Rabbi Yossi Shita, that all you need is shlishi v'shvi as far as Kohen Gadol is concerned, but he accepts the Shita Rabbi Meir as far as Kohen Asarif Sapara, requiring, as it were, Hazah on every single day of the 7 days of Prisha. My love, Bahaka Mifli. The Gemara is going to try to indicate an interdependence between this machloket, between Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yossi, regarding whether the Hazah has to be daily, and the machloket about Tuma, Hutra B'tzibur, or Tchuya B'tzibur. Rabbi Meir Savar Tuma D'chuya Hi B'tzibur. We're not excited about the possibility of activating the principle of Tuma is Mutter B'tzibur. For the sake of a carbon tzibur, we're going to override Tuma. No. That's a violation that we want to avoid if we can at all costs. And therefore, if we're going to guarantee absolutely that there's no Tuma over here, we need Hazah on all 7 days. We'll soon see about Wednesday, in order to guarantee that he is Kar. And that's what we're required to do. Whereas Rabbi Yossi Somer, Tuma, Heter Hi B'tzibur. According to Rabbi Yossi, strictly speaking, we can allow the Kohen Gadol to bring all the Karbanos Tzibur of Yom Kippurim, even B'tuma. Ella, we want the Rabbanan to try to make it a little bit more ideal, and therefore we're going to require Tara, which means let's do the bare basics. And let's do the Hazah on Shlishi Shvi, and that's enough. We don't have to go overboard to cover every single possibility under the sun, because in any event, Tuma Hutra B'tzibur. So the Gemara now reanalyzes this machlokas between Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yossi. The Tizbara, I'm going to show you that your interpretation of Rabbi Yossi, namely that Rabbi Yossi holds Tuma Hutra B'tzibur, contradicts another statement of Rabbi Yossi, and therefore it's untenable. Isa Rabbi Yossi Heter B'tzibur Tuma Hutra B'tzibur Hazah Klal Lamal. You know what? Why doesn't Rabbi Yossi just stick to the Doraisa halacha, and on a Torah level, even if in the worst case scenario the Kohen Gadol contracted Tumas Mes, he still could do the avoda because Tuma Hutra B'tzibur. Why do the Rabbanan have to be more pious and more strict than the Torah? And therefore, I'd rather present the following thesis. Everybody agrees, Hani Tanoi, all these Tanoi, including Rabbi Yossi, that Tuma D'chuya Hi B'tzibur. No, if Tuma D'chuya B'tzibur, I understand Rabbi Yossi, I understand Rabbi Meir very well, but what's Rabbi Yossi? Hacha b'hakam ifli. Rabbi Meir savar minin tvila bizmana mitzvah. That if all things are equal, we have to guarantee that the tefillah is done at the exact time. Now, we have a hekesh between tefillah and hazah. So although the Gemara only mentions tefillah explicitly, but the Gemara has in mind not only tefillah, but also hazah, and hazah has to be bismana. And how can we guarantee that this mitzvah of tefillah bismana, of hazah bismana mitzvah will be fulfilled unless we take into consideration all possible scenarios and therefore require hazah on every single day, as we said earlier, because the first day might be the third, etc., etc. And that's called in the Gemara's language, Tvila Izmana Mitzvah. Now, the pasuk itself is in Sefer Bamidbar in Perikutes. It says, V'yizah tahor al hatamei b'yom hashlishi u'b'yom hashvi'i v'chit'o b'yom hashvi'i v'chibeis b'kadav rachatz b'mayim v'toyer ba'erev. So you see that the Torah singles out these days, the third day and the seventh day. And the pasuk seems to go out of its way to emphasize that these are the 2 days, and Hazah is to be implemented on those 2 days. In fact, when you look at the pasuk says B'yom HaShvi twice, and it doesn't seem to be anything but redundant. And the extra B'yom HaShvi is going to tell me that it's got to be on Yom HaShvi. We're going to make an equation between Yom HaShlishi and Yom HaShvi. And once again, we have a hekesh that compares Hazah and Tefillah and Hazah. Therefore, Tefillah requires Yom HaShlishi, Yom HaShvi, as we saw in the Gemara. So too Hazah, because the pasuk of Ahizah is referring explicitly to Azah, and it says B'yom HaShlishi B'yom HaShvi. So that's Rabbi Meir's opinion. During the time of the pre-show, we have to guarantee that there will be Azah on Shlishi and Shvi. You can only do so if there's Azah on a daily basis. However, Rabbi Yossi Sover lo amrin in Tefillah B'zman HaMitzvah. According to Rabbi Yossi, when the Torah says U'b'yom hashvi v'chit'o b'yom hashvi, we're going to derive a different halacha from it. That's a sugya of Masechet Kedusha. We're not going to get into that, but suffice it to say that there's no absolute mitzvah here that requires Yom HaShlishi and Yom HaShvi. There's no such drasha. Whatever extra words you use and are redundant to derive this drasha, we need for something else. So there's no need to do the azah every single day of the pre-show. You can do it on the third day and the seventh day, and even if it's not exactly bismana, but it's within the framework of the 7 days, and that's fine. Okay, V'sova Rabbi Yossi lo amrin in Tefillah B'zman HaMitzvah. I have a contradiction here, because for Tanya going to prove from a brisa that Rabbi Yossi in fact holds Tefillah B'zman HaMitzvah. So that can't be the explanation of Rabbi Yossi. Hareisha Yesham Shem Kosav Al B'Saro. Now we have a case where they wrote the name of Hashem, the holy name of Hashem, the canopy obliterated in this tree, on his body, and now he needs to wash his body. Hareza lo yirchatz v'lo yosach. He should not wash his body nor anoint himself, because the possibility exists that he may blot out the name of Hashem, lo tasun kein l'Hashem Elokeichem, and violate this Isur La as a result of the fact that he obliterated the name of Hashem. Lo yamid v'mokum tinofel. Since he has the Shem Hashem on his body, he shouldn't stand in a place that has a foul odor with this tzoa, some sort of filth, because that would undermine the covet of that we have to have to the Shem Hashem. Damnalo tefillah shel mitzvah. What happens if he's not washing just to keep himself clean, but he's washing for the mitzvah of tefillah? Is then we're going to allow him that rechitza, that tefillah shel mitzvah, under the following conditions. Orech olav gemi vitovel. He takes something called gemi, which is in English called a reed glass, a kind of a growth, a grass, and he's going to wrap that part of his body that has the shame on it around with that reed glass. And that is going to protect the Shem Hashem from being obliterated, because if he ties it tightly on his skin, then the water won't be able to go in there. Now, again, you might ask, isn't it a chatzitza? That's going to undermine the tefillah. So we're going to have to say it's tight enough to prevent the obliteration of the name, but it's not that tight that it would be permanent, so to speak, and it's a chatzitza. And all this is the Tanakh Rabbi Yossi Omer, Yored v'tovel kedarko, that he doesn't have to bother with this korech gemi business. And the only condition that Rabbi Yossi adds here in this tefillah is bilvad shelo yeshafshev, as long as he doesn't actively rub himself and obliterate the name of Hashem. I'm alone. We have a tradition to be tefillah b'zman HaMitzvah coming. The argument is about this issue. To Tanakh Sovar lo amrin tefillah b'zman HaMitzvah, and therefore, according to the Tanakh, it's not absolutely required that the Tameh go into the mikvah on that particular day. And then what we don't want to do is, well, let's start with Rabbi Yossi first. Rabbi Yossi will shed a light on the Chachamim. According to Rabbi Yossi, so amrin tefillah b'zman HaMitzvah, we have to make sure that immediately on that day, without delay, he's tovel. If you're going to ask him to run around and look for this kroch halav chut shel gemi, and you're going to have to tie it in just exactly such a way. By that time, the day will pass, and we have to be afraid that he won't be Mekayim Tefillah B'Zman Mitzvah. So for the sake of Tefillah B'Zman Mitzvah, Rabbi Yossi says, we can do away with the reed glass, and we have to say that since he's not actively destroying the name of God, and the pasuk says lo tasun kain, you need an asiyah. This is not called an asiyah. He's going into the mikvah, and as an indirect result, what happens is that the name of Hashem gets a blip. But the Chachamim hold that tefillah b'zman lav mitzvah. So let's do it the best way possible, and let's tie a reed grass. And now he's going to run around looking for a reed grass, and who knows, the day may pass. So what? Tanakama holds tefillah b'zman lav mitzvah. Fine. So now we're really in a bind because we just tried to interpret Rabbi Yossi in the discussion about whether or not we need a hazah on a daily basis or not. Rabbi Yossi was of the opinion that tefillah b'zman lav mitzvah, lo amrin tefillah b'zman mitzvah. But here you see Rabbi Yossi clearly maintains the position that tefillah b'zman mitzvah. That's why he doesn't want to play around and look around for this gemi business. I'm going to assume now that both Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Meir hold that tefillah b'zman mitzvah. And now you're going to ask me, well, if tefillah b'zman mitzvah, then certainly Rabbi Meir is right. We have to guarantee that there's hazon every single day of the 7 days of Prisha. That just like we derived that in tefillah you need bizmano, so too hazah is equated by analogy to tefillah, and therefore hazah also requires bizmano. There's an urgency. Rabbi Yossi sover lo makshinin hazah l'tefillah. He never accepted the hekesh that identifies hazah with tefillah and equates the two, and therefore though tefillah bizmano mitzvah, and now we're holding kuli alma lo pligi tefillah b'zman mitzvah. That's why Rabbi Yossi, in fact, said in the case where he has the name of Hashem on his body, that we will not have him run around looking for a kevin. And the reason why Rabbi Yossi holds in this case of hazah that we don't have to run around and insist that he has hazah on a daily basis is because Rabbi Yossi doesn't accept the hekesh between hazah and tefillah. So now, the pasuk that we quoted earlier, let's go over the pasuk one more time. The pasuk says, "V'yizah hatahar ala tamei b'yom hashlishi u'b'yom hashvi'i v'chit'o b'yom hashvi'i." And what we're going to assume now is that what the Torah means is that the first hazah cannot be earlier than Yom HaShlishi. Now we need a gap of 4 days between one hazah and the second hazah. And it's a minimum of 4 days. We don't care when he does the second hazah. Doesn't have to be on Yom HaShvi. So it can't be earlier than Yom HaShlishi. It could be later. It can't be earlier the second hazah of Yom HaShvi, but it could be later. So there's no urgency over here, and that's called hazah. And that's Rabbi Yossi. Now let's get on to the third sheet. Rabbi Chanina ben Askan Kodim, where does he hold in this machlokas? Gemara says it doesn't work out either way. Then afilu kohen gadol b'yom kippurim nami. Rabbi Chanina should agree that even a kohen gadol requires tefillah all 7 days, like Rabbi Meir, because he has accepted the hekesh between hazah and tefillah, and therefore we need bizmana. Why do we require 7 days of hazah for the kohen hasorev if there's no basis for the conclusion that hazah bizmana mitzvah? Liolam lo makish. But the reason why Rabbi Chanina Skan Kona requires a daily tefillah for 7 days in the kohen haporesh is because kohen hasorev sapola maila bial. We want to be very strict about the kohen who's going to be sorry to par, because, as we've said many times, we deliberately are metabiyim, lafukim, and latstukim, and therefore we don't want any kulas to come about, so we're going to be machmer on the rabbanan level and require a daily hazah. More now quotes a brisa, Kiman Asla Hadatan Rabbanan, which shita is reflected in the following brisa. Ein bein kohen asarif sapar lekohen gadol b'yom kippurim ella. And here we turn to the Avches Amid Beis, Shezeh Prishtas Likdusha, V'achav HaKohanim Nogim, but Zeh Prishtas Litara Ve'ein Echav HaKohanim Nogim